This podcast, Depraved Heart Murder, The Tupelo Presleys, is a creation of Southern Fried Chicky Productions, LLC, and was produced in Sun Bear Studio in Ripley, Mississippi. The material presented in this podcast is for general information purposes only. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast interviews do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Southern Fried Chicky Productions, LLC, or Sun Bear Studio, LLC.
Hey y'all, this is Christy McBrayer. I'm the principal member of Southern Fried Chicky Productions, LLC, and your podcast host. This podcast represents the culmination of my 20-year obsession with this fascinating story that occurred in my Mississippi hometown. I hope you enjoy Depraved Heart Murder, The Tupelo Presleys.
In Tupelo, Mississippi, a sheriff who was a cousin of Elvis Presley was killed in a shootout early today that also left a suspect dead. The gun battle began after a man fled from a police roadblock and pushed a woman nude and bound with tape from his car, authorities said. The man wrecked his car and was later cornered in a shed at a nearby home. Lee County Sheriff Harold Ray Presley shoved a deputy out of the way and was apparently shot several times, but returned fire, killing Billy Ray Stone, authorities said. Harold Presley's father was the brother of Elvis Presley's grandfather, making them first cousins once removed. The late king of rock and roll was born in Tupelo in 1935. A wall of Presley's office was covered with Elvis Presley pictures and posters.
Okay, I'm going to do my level best to describe the events of the evening of July 5th until the wee morning hours of July 6th of 2001. As I mentioned, the conflicting reports by media outlets, and reputable ones for that matter, and conflicting stories of those involved, who I believe are telling what they believe is the truth, are still quite confusing. I'm going to do my best to make things as clear as I can. However, absolutely no one alive actually knows or will say exactly what happened that night. What the motivation was for a random man to kidnap a woman named Charlene Wright, which by all accounts was a sheriff's informant, and from what I have read from those who have made statements after her passing, an absolutely lovely and kind woman. I tried to reach out to those who had spoken about her to media after the incident, but failed to get a response. I did read in the Tupelo Daily Journal that her first cousin said, "She was a very sweet person. She was nice and she was kind and outgoing. If she could see that she could help you in any way, she would do it." I would also like to clarify any confusion of two people in this story with the same names. The wife of Harold Ray Presley is named Charlene Presley, and the kidnapping victim is named Charlene Wright. In an interview from 7 years ago, it might appear if her name is pronounced Charlene White. However, it is Charlene Wright. I wish I were able to find out more about her, not only to make sense of this mystery, but to also give respect to an innocent victim whose life was tragically and violently taken too soon. So, I am going to give you the Harold Ray Presley shooting timeline. July 5th, 2001, around 8 p.m., Billy Ray Stone allegedly abducts Charlene Wright at gunpoint on a Thursday night on North Green Street in Tupelo, Mississippi, prompting a manhunt and roadblocks. On July 6, 2001, around midnight, Stone avoids a roadblock on Auburn Road and leads deputies on a car chase. Wright is thrown from the truck, naked, and her hands bound with duct tape. She is reportedly run over by one of the pursuing vehicles. Stone crashes his truck near an intersection of Auburn and Fellowship Roads and flees into the woods. 4 a.m., Fellowship Road homeowner Robert Bobby Norris calls 911 because his dogs are barking. Sheriff Harold Ray Presley, Deputy Jack Tate, and Bobby Norris all enter an outbuilding behind the house. Following a gun battle, Presley dies from his wounds. Stone died from a single gunshot and multiple head trauma. July 7th, 2001. Charlene Wright dies from her injuries. July 12th, 2001, Lee County Board of Supervisors appoint Jim Johnson as interim sheriff. August 2001, 5 deputies, Sergeant Danny Dillard, Sergeant Gary Dodds, Sergeant Jason Stanford, Johnny Lee, and Jack Tate are all placed on administrative leave following the release of Stone's autopsy. November of 2001, Larry Presley, who is Harold Ray Presley's older brother, is elected sheriff in a special election. So now let's speak to 3 of the people on the scene who agreed to be interviewed. Deputies at the time, Ricky Payne and Ronnie Burrows, along with current Sheriff Jim Johnson.
Thing that happened, the events of that night, from your perspective.
Okay, as far as my position, I was just a regular patrol deputy. I was at home that night. I was off duty. The phone rang early in the morning. My wife, Holly, had actually answered the phone because it woke me up, and I asked her, who was that, Holly? She said, it was somebody wanting to know if you were home. And I said, why? She said, well, Sheriff Harold Ray had, him and one of his deputies had been killed. And knew that you stayed with him a lot and wondered if you were at home. I said, oh, Holly, that's just somebody making a mess, just trying to stir up something. So I dozed off back to sleep. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. I said, well, let me get the phone this time. And this time it was actually the sheriff's department. The dispatcher advised me that Harold Ray had been shot, and for me to get ready and get out, the suspect was not in custody yet. So I get out and head towards Tupelo, and I hit 45 at Shannon, headed north. I hear over the radio that the helicopter picked Harold Ray up and he was unresponsive. Then I can't remember what deputy it was, come over across the radio, said they wanted no one else on scene. So I went directly to the hospital. After I got to the hospital, I was there probably 5 or 10 minutes. The doctor come out and told us all that Harold Ray was deceased. And after that, I proceeded on to the scene. Of course, I was not allowed on the scene. I was put at the end of the driveway guarding the scene. And that's pretty much the way it wound up with me.
If you don't mind, just as clearly as you can, your account of the incident of Harold Ray.
During the incident at the house, the last incident, I wasn't even out there. I was back in Tupelo at the jail. So when all the shootings happened, I wasn't even out there.
What was your experience just that night? Did you hear anything? Did it come over the speaker?
We had a checkpoint. Pickup turned around on us. Well, we went after it, and he stopped. When I asked him for his license, he shot 3 times out the truck window.
At you?
At
So
me.
Billy Ray Stone? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Then he took off again and went up and went around the church up there. I went around behind him, and one of my guys had pulled up in front of the church waiting on him, and he shot at him when he come around the church, and then went back up Auburn Road, and that's when the sheriff got involved in it. He was behind him, and then there was a Tupelo officer and another vehicle in behind it, and then I was behind them all the way up Auburn Road.
But you didn't go all the way down
I
Fellowship?
went all the way to Fellowship, and then Billy Ray Stone wrecked his truck and hit the woods on us. And then from there, we rode around and looked, and I had to turn and go back to the jail to get fuel. While I was at the jail getting fuel, when the shots fired.
Were you there seeing Miss Charlene White or any of that happening when Billy Ray Stone kicked her out?
When I went by, she was laying here. She had already came out of the vehicle, and I didn't see her come out of the vehicle. Then Harold got involved in the chase about 78 and Auburn Road, somewhere around in there, as we was going back north.
And then you were returning back, so then you left.
Yeah, Harold Ray told us he wanted us to ride that circle in case he came out of those woods, and I had to go back and get fuel, so I could, I was at the jail and all the other. We had been there probably 2 hours looking for him before they actually found him where he was at. I'm saying 2 hours. I really don't know. We had been on the scene there a while at the wreck before we started going to ride the area.
There was not anything like you being behind Harold Ray and him accidentally ran over Charlene White and you dodging her, going around her.
No, No, she was laying, down the side of the road.
Oh, so you didn't have to like get around her in the car.
No.
Okay. In my mind, I'm thinking there's like a checkpoint at the end of Fellowship Road, broke through, and everybody started chasing them down Fellowship Road to Norris's place. That's not how it happened at all.
See, I didn't even know where Norris, didn't know where Norris lived.
I felt like he was, I don't know if I could say nervous, or he wasn't himself the last week.
Actually, the last 3 months was really when he started.
He was different. He didn't act like the same Harold Ray that we knew. I mean, he still would try to cut up with us and stuff like that, but he wouldn't.
He's very cautious.
Yeah, he seemed like he was cautious. I don't always catch on to stuff as quick as other people do, but I just thought he had something going on. But he definitely didn't seem like, he didn't seem like the Harold Ray that I knew.
Were y'all there when they came in after he had passed away, after all those incidents, really quickly after that, when they came into the office and with all of his Elvis memorabilia? Can you tell us a little bit about, were you there, what happened?
I think all that happened before we got there.
Yeah, before we got there. It was at 4 o'clock when I got the call, because my husband was on duty. And I don't even remember getting ready or anything because I was in shock. And I do remember when I got there, I just sat in front of the door and
cried.
That's the last
I mean,
remember.
You both sat down in front of this door and just sat there and cried. Both of us did.
But a lot of that happened before we got there, so did I feel like he hid stuff in his office? Yeah. I mean, that was just Harold Ray.
Well, that was his little home away from home. He
had
had everything in there.
Okay, one of the most fascinating things about this whole crazy thing, and there's so much, is Billy Ray Stone.
Mm-hmm.
And I am trying to find more out about Billy Ray Stone, but he, to me, and this is just, in my research, his action, this man caused so much for so many citizens of not just the obvious.
Well, he started the cycle.
Right.
His brother, Mr. Earl, fine businessman, passed away last year, I think, or year before last. I can't remember. Great guy, good friend of mine. He could probably answer a lot of questions about Mr. Billy, his brother. But, it was, that particular night when all of it went down and the pursuit happened, I can remember the call coming out. I can remember the pursuit. I can remember the fact that the lady that he had kidnapped, he throws her out of the car, and the sheriff runs into her. And as big as Harold Ray was, and as masculine as he was, and as burly as he was, and tough, I saw a totally different side of him many times. There's a lot of times this was his office here, same office. His desk was turned that way, but this was the same office. And I've sat in here, and he went on a diet, was wanting to know how to lose weight. And, that's just not something you'd think he would talk to anybody about. And then his spiritual side. I remember the day he took office, I gave him a Bible verse book, a verse for every day. And he kept it, and he would, and that particular night, just like you said, it changed a lot of people. And I saw when that action took place and the chase was over and Mr. Stone had ran off and was unaccounted for, Harold Ray was not necessarily so concerned at finding Mr. Stone. He was worried about that lady.
Yeah.
And he kept calling and calling and calling. And we had one of my partners, who is now my chief deputy, went to the hospital and called me back and said, "We just want you to know that she's alive." And I told the sheriff that. And he went from that compassionate thing, he then hit the burly side again, and he was ready to go find him. But it was just a load off of him to, to know that, and of course the sheriff passed away before she did. So he never knew that she didn't make it.
Now, from what I was told, she was an informant, Charlene Wright.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. So he was familiar.
He was
with her.
familiar with her, yes.
And then, this could be totally not true, but did he by accident run over her, meaning Harold Ray?
Yes, during the chase, Mr. Stone either shoved her out of the car or she was able to get out of the car because she was in the car against her wheel. I mean, she was duct taped, she was tied up. That's what brought the suspicion when she pulled up to the safety checkpoint. And at some time during the chase, she came out the passenger side. And of course, the sheriff was right on their tail, and there was nothing he could do. And, unfortunately, hit her.
Why in the world do you think that Billy Ray, I mean, obviously this is supposition, Sheriff. There's no way that you can say.
a lot of thinking, yeah.
But was it just a coincidence that this woman happened to be an informant, that Billy Ray Stone, and why did this man, do you have any idea why he would snap, why he would do what he did with this particular woman?
No, I personally, or professionally, or investigatively, do not know any connection to this lady and this man. I mean, why she was in the car, I mean, I don't know that part. I don't know any of that. I can't connect the dot.
That's just a very strange coincidence, and that her name was Charlene. Okay, so you had touched on the next question that I was going to ask you, because that federal trial had to be horrible.
It was very stressful. It was in Greenville. I was subpoenaed to testify in it. My only part in the entire situation was that the night the chase took place and the vehicle had wrecked and Mr. Stone had exited the vehicle and was in the land of unknown, I went to the scene, was standing there talking to Harold Ray, and he was giving me information as far as he knew about the case and what all was going on. Then I passed the information to him that, the lady was going to be okay, or she was living. Then we began to do the process of trying to find out not only who this guy was, but where he was at and everything else. So we were able to obtain a name. And so I had left that particular area and drove back here to the sheriff's department. My office was 4 doors down on the right. I was typing up the search warrant in order for an arrest warrant for him in order for us to get him entered on the NCIC machine, which is a National Crime Information Center database that goes nationwide, so that if anybody did stop him, they would know he was wanted and dangerous and all that. So that was my position as an investigator, to get that process started. So I was here when the call came in that the sheriff had been shot. So I immediately never did even finish the warrant, threw down what I was doing and headed back out there. And so when I got there, I pulled up to the house. The shooting took place in the back of the house inside a storage shop type block building. It was, I'm trying to think of the guy's name.
Bobby Norris.
Bobby Norris. He was a retired Tupelo police officer, may have served as a constable one time, I'm not sure, but he was in retired law enforcement, elderly gentleman. I remember him sitting on the back steps, and he had been shot, but he was okay. And then I remember walking toward the block building. You could not see where the sheriff was at because he was inside, but they had Mr. Stone handcuffed there on the ground. Didn't pay a lot of attention to him, but I just remember seeing him laying there. I remember the gun he used was laying close to him, and I put a 5-gallon bucket over the gun and didn't move it. I remember that part very vividly. I asked where the sheriff was at. They said he was in there. So I went in there to see if there was anything in the world, life-saving measures we could do. Was in there, noticed it was too late. There was nothing anybody could do. And in about maybe 2 or 3 minutes, 5 minutes, maybe at the most, I come back out. And the only thing I noticed was the posture of Mr. Stone was changed. And that was it. I didn't see anything. Couldn't witness anything. I don't know what happened or anything. And then the next, anytime there's a shooting like that outside, Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, federal people come in and investigate. And so that's when the investigation turned to criminal charges and an indictment. And so anybody that had anything to do with it got tied up in that court system. And so that was my part.
My final interview is with Ken Stanford, who was the EMT on the scene. He was such an adorable man. He pulled up on a warm Mississippi day in 2016 with his precious dog and his Elvis Presley Lake and Park truck. He was such a mild-mannered, polite, and affable gentleman. Unfortunately, he has passed away since this interview. I was told that in April of 2020, he spent the day doing what he loved most, fishing. He returned home and celebrated the fact that his wife was cooking chicken and dressing for him, and it wasn't even Christmas or Thanksgiving, and fell victim of an apparent heart attack. He was only 61. I am so grateful to have had the pleasure of meeting him and allowing him to tell his side of this story.
My name is Ken Stanford. I'm currently with the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. I'm lake manager over at Presleys Lake in Tupelo. And the night Harold Ray got shot, I was with the South Tupelo Fire Department. I was a lieutenant, and I was a medic at that department. And we were called to the scene of the shooting. And when I arrived on scene, Mr. Norris, he was involved in the shooting. He was shot. He was shot twice, and I was assigned to work on him. And when I got to him, he was sitting on his porch. And when I examined him, he had 2 bullet wounds in him. One was through his side. It was through and through. And the other one was right in the center of his back. And I couldn't figure out how come he was sitting up, shot in the center of his back. So I started examining him all over, and I found the bullet. It was just under the skin on his right side, just above his belt line. And so he was turned in a hard angle when the second shot was fired. It hit him in the back, and that's what saved him from getting his spine cut and tape. It'd be easy took out, but he won't let nobody take it out. Yeah, I think he knows more than he's telling. And I worked on him, got him stable. We got him on the stretcher, loaded him up, and they put him in the ambulance, and they left with him. And then Stone, the man that caused all of this, he was laying on the ground. Me and another medic hooked a EKG machine up to him and checking him, and he had a rhythm, but it was a non-survivable rhythm. It was just really a flutter. And we run tape on him for a few minutes, and it quit. He finally expired. And Harold Ray, he was in the building, in the little house, and I never got to work on him, but the other medics worked on him, got him packaged, and we put him on a helicopter and left with him. And then we were told to leave the scene. It was a crime scene, so we had to get all of our stuff up and leave. And when I left, Stone was still laying on the ground out there. So, but we was made to leave after that.
And was it Harold Ray that was taken in the helicopter?
Yeah, they took him in the helicopter, Harold Ray. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But,
did Mr. Norris have any words to you? Did he say anything to you about what happened or anything?
No, he didn't. He was kind of shocky. Because he just thought he was fixing to die and all, I think, but he was just real shocky, and he was just worried about himself right then. So that's about all he's talking about is him. So he didn't say anything about what happened. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was a bad scene.
Did you know personally? Who did you know personally that was involved in this? Besides, obviously, Harold Ray. You knew Harold Ray. Yeah. Is he the only one that you knew?
He's the only one that I knew, yeah, personally. Now, earlier that night, the woman that Stone had kidnapped, I forgot about her.
Charlene White.
White, yeah. I worked on her. She jumped out of the truck, and Stone ran over her and cut her, I believe it was her right arm off. And it was just barely hanging on by a piece of skin. And she was laying in the middle of Auburn Road, it's County Road 931. And anyway, I worked on her, got her packaged, and she was still duct taped. Her feet and hands were still duct taped, and we got the gag off of her. He had her gagged, and we got her stable, and there wasn't no place to land the helicopter, so we had to put her in the ambulance, and they rushed her to the hospital, which she later expired. They shot the back tire off and was running on a rim, and that's what cut her arm off when he run over with just a rim. best way we could figure what the cuts were.
Did anybody tell you that you spoke to that was there, obviously, thereafter or had arrived? Did they give you any sense of what they thought actually happened?
No, not really. We just knew there was a big shootout. That's all we knew.
Mm-hmm.
And Stone was out in the yard on the ground, and Harold Ray was in the building. Mr. North was sitting on the porch. That's about, all we really knew. Mm-hmm. And we knew by listening to the radio that they'd been chasing Stone. And then when we got the call about the woman, Miss White, that we knew, put it all together what was going on. By that time, he'd done abandoned truck and was in the woods, and they were doing a manhunt for him in the woods at the end of Auburn Road.
In the subsequent weeks after that, did anybody who was there have talk about theories after that, or how long did it take for them to give you or talk about the theories that what occurred?
Well, everything was hushed up. The FBI came around and Highway Patrol and dared us to talk. We couldn't even talk to each other. And then when they came and interviewed me, they threatened to make me a part of it, say I was going to be indicted as an conspirator. And they did some other people, fire department, and they even did the mayor of Tupelo, W.K. Webb. They threatened him. Yeah, they told me that they'd make sure I'd lose my job, my home, all of that.
Who told you that?
FBI agent and birthday. They came to my house when they interviewed me. But I didn't know the FBI was that way. I'm going to tell you. I thought they were good guys, but they're not. And some of the other people, the fire department, they threatened them too, same way. If they told me they'd have me indicted and as involved in the shooting and stuff, and I'd go to prison if I didn't tell them what they wanted to know. And I testified to that in court. But yeah, that kind of, I think, threw a little wrench in their game then.
And you testified that in court in what court hearing? In
the federal court in Greenville, when they had the two deputies up on charges for killing Stone.
Okay.
Yeah, so I
which are Danny Dillard and Jason Stanford.
Jason's my brother.
And Jason's your brother.
Yeah, it was a pretty bad deal. But they did get acquitted of it, though. But yeah, it was a bad thing all the way around.
I'm so sorry you had to go through that. How did the FBI threaten you? Like in what ways?
Oh, they just come out and said that we'll make sure you lose your job, your home. Had me up in court, Oxford, as a conspiracy to the murder, and had me charged with a conspiracy of murder.
Murder of Billy Ray Stone or murder of Harold Ray?
Stone.
Did they threaten you by phone? Did they threaten you in person?
No, they came to the house.
They came to your house?
Yeah. After I give them my statement, then they called me a liar and all that. That's when they started threatening me, but I was telling them straight up. It wasn't what they wanted to hear, is what it was. Yeah, they had some of the fire department members scared to death. Yeah, those people hounded us night and day. They call it disappear in the bottom of the well syndrome. That would really scare you. Especially Lisa, that little girl was on the fire department. She was just horrified. And but that caused me to leave the fire department after that. It just wasn't worth it.
So how long did you leave the fire department after the event?
It was about 6 months, probably. Okay. And I was on there for 11 years, and I loved it till then. So it just killed our joy of it, or reason we're supposed to be there. It just took all that away.
Do you have any idea what the motivation was to treat all of you like that at the cover-up?
I think I cannot remember that lady prosecutor's name she came down from Washington, but I think she was just looking to bag two officers, is what I think. She was just kind of a hateful little old woman, and she just had her sights set on prosecuting those deputies. And that's what all they was after, was to prosecute those deputies.
Maybe just for political purposes?
Probably. That's what I figured. Because she got extremely mad when I told them in court about how they threatened us and all. And she got so upset, the judge made the jury leave, and he got on her real good about it, made her settle down. And I told her he'd throw her out of court, and she didn't calm down. So I think that's, she just wanted to bag two officers.
I'm sure that was a very difficult time for you and your brother.
Yeah, it was our whole family.
But he's doing well today.
Yeah, he's doing real good. Got his own business and all. He's doing real good.
It seems like you guys have done a good job of recovering as best you could.
Yeah, we did. We got over it. But some things you just got to get over, move on.
I am so thrilled to have on our podcast today a good friend of mine and legal expert here, Victor Fleitas. He is a solo practitioner in Tupelo, Mississippi, where he practices primarily in the areas of civil rights law, employment and employment discrimination law, and felony criminal defense. He earned his BA in International Relations from Florida International University in Miami and his JD with honors from the University of Mississippi School of Law in Oxford. You're also, I believe, an adjunct professor at Ole Miss.
I am.
And just an all-around cool guy. So glad to have you here, Victor. Thank you for coming on.
You are so kind to have me. Thank you.
We haven't delved too far in so far in this podcast about the federal charges that were against the sheriff's deputies and the whole thing that happened with Billy Ray Stone and Billy Ray Stone's family, with them beating him up in the whole federal trial. That's what they were accused of, and they were acquitted after a long, arduous trial. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I recall, and I'm going strictly by memory, not having looked back at anything from that time, the circumstances of Billy Ray Stone's death after he shot and killed Harold Ray Presley were in question. Was there excessive force? Was he beaten to death? Was the force used necessary to apprehend a felon and someone who had demonstrated that he would shoot and kill other officers? He had kidnapped the lady.
Charlene Wright.
And so it revolved around the question of, did they violate Billy Ray Stone's civil rights through the use of excessive force by killing or beating him where he was not capable of offering resistance or not. And as a result of which they were charged. They would have been charged under a federal statute, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, which is the criminal civil rights statute. A lot of people are familiar with its civil counterpart, which is 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. And what the statute says is no person shall deprive another person of their rights under the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And it criminalizes violations of the Constitution, one of those being violating someone's right to life through the use of excessive force or a seizure that results in injury under the Fourth Amendment. The officers, the case would have been presented by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oxford, and the case was ultimately tried in federal court. As I recall, our current sheriff in Lee County, Jim Johnson, who I believe at that time was working for the Attorney General's office as an investigator, was a witness for the prosecution, if I'm not mistaken. I know one of the defense attorneys was Tony Faries, and after considering all the evidence, the officers were acquitted, meaning that the jury determined that they had not violated any of that. Let's make clear what the finding was. The jury determined that the prosecution could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Billy Ray Stone's constitutional rights were violated.
So far, you learned about Sheriff Harold Ray Presley in our first episode. And now, you just heard several accounts of what occurred that fateful July night of 2001. There's so much more, and a few members of the Tupelo Presleys for you to meet in this very complicated story. In our next episode, my producer Melinda Marsalis asked me questions and clarifications as we discuss more of Depraved Heart Murder, the Tupelo Presleys.
Twisted Mayberry, Mississippi. Good old boys club, Kentucky whiskey. I went out of jailbreak. How much more can these men take? I went out of my head, I'll get it back. What makes a depraved heart act? Was it all in the King's name that made the jailbreak? How much more can these men take?
Depraved Heart Murder, The Tupelo Presleys, was written and directed by Christy McBrayer, produced, edited, mixed, and mastered by Melinda Marsalis in Sun Bear Studio. Original music by Bo Lindsey, Brad Elliott, and Christy McBrayer. Deanna Whaley, Director of Audio. Voice talent, Tom Park, Will Vance, Steve Bass, and Joyce Graddy. Thank you to all of the people who graciously participated in interviews, and a very big thank you to Charlene Presley for allowing us the rights to her story and the use of her source material. Depraved Heart Murder, The Tupelo Presleys, is a Southern Fried Chickie copyrighted work.